From the Godrej DEI Lab, welcome to India Included. Here's your host, Parmesh Shahani.
And just like that, we come to the last episode of this season of India Included. Is that a solitary tear trickling down your cheek? Don't worry. I promise you that there will be season 2. But for that, you have to shower us with all your love. So listen to all the episodes, share this podcast with all your friends. And together, let's come together and create more inclusive workplaces in India. Viksit Bharat has to be an inclusive Bharat. And it's up to all of us to make this happen. This last episode is about our very own Godrej Industries Group. And we are only 127 years young. We grew alongside India's Swadeshi movement, the OG Make in India. And we grew alongside our freedom struggle. Today, we make buildings, financial products, soaps, snacks, mosquito repellents, stuff that's made its way into hundreds of millions of homes. Godrej has what I think is a pretty unique reputation for trust. I once met a senior HR supervisor at a Godrej Consumer Products plant in Malanpur, Madhya Pradesh, who was the first woman in her family to go to work. All the way back in 1991, just before the plant began operations, this supervisor's mother had cycled to the gates of the factory to submit her daughter's job application. She didn't know what job it would be. She had no idea what life in a factory staffed fully by men was supposed to be like. But she trusted that her daughter would do well here because she heard the name Godrej and felt it could be relied upon. In all the years I've worked here, I've realized how important this trust is to the role Godrej plays in the lives of its consumers and its employees. This essential sense of fairness, of being an institution that others can trust, that sees social progress as part and parcel of economic progress, has often informed the relationship between Godrej Industries and the people who work here. That fairness is fundamental to DI work. I remember when I first joined Godrej, I asked, why do all the forms say spouse and not partner? You know, they changed the language immediately. And ever since, every family benefit for Godrej employees has been framed in the most gender-neutral, queer-friendly way possible. Godrej isn't the only Indian company at the DEI party. We are working alongside and learning from so many others. You've heard from some of these other companies on other episodes of this podcast. Hint, hint, hashtag no pressure, listen to all the other episodes. Now, we at Godrej happen to focus our DI efforts on 3 historically excluded groups, or what we call focus cohorts. That's if you want to use an HR term. So, women, LGBTQIA plus folks, and persons with disabilities. And these are cohorts that almost every major Indian company also officially focuses on. We're only as good as what we do next, is what my boss, Nisa Godrej, tells me all the time. So we're trying, we are experimenting, we are learning, and that is what today's episode is about. The story of how one company is trying to get inclusion right. I have with me in my studio today 2 very special and unique guests. These are 2 key people at the heart of Godrej's DEI ecosystem, and they will tell you the story of inclusion at Godrej Industries. How far we've come, how we got here, and where we are going to go together. Sandhya Ramesh, DEI Lead at Godrej Consumer Products, and Zoya, DEI Lead at Godrej Properties. Welcome to the last episode of India Included. Let me tell everyone a little bit about both of you. Sandhya Ramesh heads DEI initiatives at Godrej Consumer Products Limited. She's involved with GCP's diversity missions all around the world and can tell you how DEI looks different in Latin America and in West Africa from what it looks like in India. When Zoya came to work at Godrej Properties a few years ago, the Godrej One headquarters had, I think, 1 gender-neutral bathroom and maybe 5 queer people that we knew of. Today, I can say with pride that I work at a group with more than 150 out and proud LGBTQIA plus employees. Yeah, a majority of that number comes from Godrej Properties. And a majority of these people would probably credit Zoya as having played a pivotal role in their career and their success. From helping to grow an ERG for women in real estate, to diving deep into how to scale disability inclusion at work, to being an icon for queer people and allies at Godrej, they are in the thick of it all. So welcome to the show, both of you. I'm so excited to tell the Godrej story with you, but I'm also excited to learn and tell your stories. So Zoya, Sandhya, how do you feel being on my couch?
It's liberating.
Zoya, you're not saying anything.
It's good, Big Daddy.
You feel good?
Yeah.
Since you call me Big Daddy, which I am, tell us about the pre-Godrej journey.
I was hired into Tata Capital first. I was into strategy, a typical MT. And generally, if you know how campus programs work, in this period of 1 year, you generally move out to another organization. Then I did move into another organization, which is called Yotun. It's in the space of paints and coatings. So I worked there for about 6 years, pretty long span. I moved around in multiple roles from marketing, digital, retail, and also I set up the DEI council in my previous organization. So my fascination to have a space that is inclusive. And this happened because I just walked up to the then MD and I told them that, I feel that there is a lot of work that we need to do in the space of inclusion. And they were very forthcoming and kind of coming saying that, okay, what do we need to do? And that's when we set up the DEI council. And from there is where my work on DEI started. I think somebody from Godrej picked it up. They called me for an interview.
And then from like painting people's houses, you came and painted Godrej Rainbow.
Yes, you could.
So why do you say yes?
I think the culture of hiring itself was really a calling out for me. So when I came, it was not so much as an interview. It was more like a discussion of what she wants to do with GPL and how I wanted to bring in inclusion in the spaces that I worked. It just fit so well. She told me one thing that Nisa had told her. She said that we had all the policies, but we don't have the people to use them or to take benefit out of them. So if you see whatever we have done in the last 2 years has been to increase the representation and in the process also understand that certain policies needed to make some changes. But that's where my journey started.
Sandhya, now you are the most athletic person I've known ever. So how did you come? I mean, I know how you came here. I only recruited you, but tell us about, actually even before you tell us about just why you came, how you came here from Great Place to Work. And now I think we are the greatest place to work, but chalo, tell us about that. Before that, tell me about your journey.
So I started off in like the sales and marketing division of a recruitment process company that was,
nice.
Into design and development in the automotive and aerospace sector. So I was just working initially in recruitment consulting. I got a handle of how recruitment works. I then said, hey, we don't have like a fully fledged HR department. So I started getting into the understanding of what it requires from an onboarding process, from a rewards process. And I think I got my first real corporate break with Lifestyle, which was Landmark's corporate office in India. Then I worked with Aditya Birla when they were just taking over Pantaloon from Future Group, continuing to be in the space of HR, which is when I said, okay, now it all makes sense. I also pursued a PG from PGC HRM from XLRI at the same time.
Then Great Place to Work.
And then Great Place to Work for about 7 years.
And then we robbed you.
Yes, I'm here at GCP.
7 years.
Now for both of you, how differently did Indian companies look at DI when you both first started to work in wherever y'all were working until now? And since y'all have both been at Godrej, how have you yourself seen attitude shift, not just within your own group companies, but also within the group at large?
We're actually going to pass it back to you, Parmesh, because you've been here for more than a decade to really see attitude shifts and behaviors shift. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what has unfolded in the last decade or so. And then, of course, I'll talk a little bit about
portion mein nahi tha. But I have seen corporate India to shift radically. And within that also, I see a clear distinction between performative and intentional committed inclusion. And I think in the past few years, what we've done at Godrej Industries is really committed, intentional, experimental, and much more. But now let's start with you since you asked me that question. You tell me now. How has it been before? And within Godrej Consumer specifically and larger, like what shifts are you seeing happening?
I'd say the entire foray started off at Great Place to Work, we used to have something called a Monday morning meeting. And it was one of these Monday morning meetings where he used to run this session called Thinking Like a Feminist, right, for everybody who would join into the organization. And one of the Monday morning meetings, he said, we study so much on employee experience, but we have no insight whatsoever on parity when it comes to experience of whether women in workplaces are experiencing the workplace as similar to their male counterparts, or is there a lot of difference in that, and what are those areas? We don't have any insight on that. So it actually started there, Parmesh, and this was back in 2017. And I was, of course, very curious. So he said, who would like to take this up? And I put up my hand, although I was in the consulting vertical, saying that, if it's research, I think it's important for us to start putting that together. So we were working as a team. That year was our first year of India's Best Workplaces for Women, when we had about 75 submissions come in of organizations saying what are they doing to ensure that, they're able to hire, retain, and grow women in the workplace. I think when we were reading through all the submissions, most of the submissions would typically talk about Women's Day. They would talk about very legal aspects of, say, having maternity policies in place, maybe a posh policy in place, maybe, not as much in the... Yeah, so the language that was used when it came to D&I was, hey, we are an equal employer, which means we're not discriminating and we're really in the guardrails of the legal frameworks that are required. So I'd say that's where we were, right, in 2017. I think today you see a very different Indian corporate ecosystem. And I think it's also been powered a lot. We saw that rush actually happen after the whole Black Lives Matter movement happened globally. And you saw the MNCs actually push a lot of thrust to India counterparts to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. I think that opened out the possibilities of other organizations which were non-MNCs, India-based organizations, to say, okay, can we also look at this? I think alongside came ESG. It only created more incentive. And I feel today we're actually sitting at the fulcrum of being able to very meaningfully take this journey forward in a sustainable fashion for organizations and the individuals.
Zoya, tell us your before and after.
So I think I'll add on what Sandhya just said. For me, when I've seen the DEI landscape from, say, 2013, 2015, a lot of companies started talking about DEI majorly from the MNC space, a lot of it more Western impact. What has happened in post 2015, 2017 at least, is that Indian companies have started to give that Indian context to D&I pertaining to the population that matters to India, right? So when we look at even in like Godrej as a group, we always talk about having the representation of the community that we are serving. If say GCPL, that's Godrej Consumer Products, looks at it from a emerging markets, then what are the markets that they are in? And same thing from a Godrej Properties perspective, we construct homes for India. So if the population that we are serving is Indians, then how do we kind of build the same space? So I think that has been one major change. I'll plug in India Culture Lab from when I speak about Godrej. I think the work that you did, Parmesh, over the last 10 years, it really put Godrej onto the space where it started becoming LGBTQ friendly, it started becoming inclusive. And what has happened is whenever I speak about even queer movements, I always say that the work that the current generation is doing it on the backs of what the past generation has really put forward, right?
If everyone's listening and you see how slyly Zoya has called me past generation.
Yeah, but no ageism here. No ageism here.
Yeah, but India included, but not oldies like you. Snap.
If I'm able to run today, it is because of the path that you created. The count that you mentioned in the start, that we have gone from 1 to 100, it has happened. It cannot have happened in just 2 years, right? It has happened over consistently being able to create that environment that people have trust on Godrej. But in the last 2 years, what I at least have come in when we have worked at GPL, the focus has been from moving it from, say, an LGBTQ friendly or a PWD friendly to an LGBTQ inclusive work. And that's setting in the right processes so that the hiring is happening, so that people are able to thrive at the workplace. The intent to impact, again, I will plug in here. So I'm a trans individual, and when I was interviewing for Godrej as well, and I entered into Godrej when I'd done my recce, so it had mentioned in the job description that there are gender neutral washrooms. And I did see that there was an all gender washroom in the cafeteria.
Yeah.
I was happy that it existed. When I was talking to Megha after joining in the first week or so, I told her that, we have an all gender washroom, but not a gender neutral washroom. She did ask me what is the difference. And what it is that all gender washroom is coming out of the space that there is limited space. So whenever you have a cafeteria, 75% of the space is designed to be for sitting area. Then you have around 20% for the pantry and around 5% for the washroom. You do not have space, and hence it becomes an all gender washroom. As soon as I told her this, I think in the second week we had taken approvals to construct on the 5th and the 6th floor where Godrej Properties is. By the third week, we had the blueprints ready, and the fourth week it was constructed. The speed on which that they saw that intent to impact move is why also is where I see the difference in the last 2 years. It has to be committed towards making this change. And this was just one example, okay? And there are multiple spaces where we have been able to now create, say, gender neutral washrooms or all-inclusive washrooms in all of our sites wherever a trans or non-binary person is hired, or also where a person with disability is being hired.
So that's actually incredible, and thank you for sharing that. Now, to both of you, I want to break down the focus on the 3 cohorts that we serve together at Godrej: cis women, LGBTQIA plus people, and persons with disabilities. Sandhya, I want to start with you. Why do most companies focus on these 3 groups only in India? And are there any other large Indian companies that focus on others? And Zoya, if after that you could just pitch in as well. But Sandhya?
So, one, Parmesh, I feel like even as Godrej, we focus on like so many other intersections, right? Like we focus on, say, working parents. We now launched a women veterans program. I think there is an intersection of caregivers who could have elderly care, right? So I feel like in spirit and at a policy level, to be able to acknowledge the intersections just within your workplace, I feel like the organization focuses on a lot more. But if you, I think, look at your ability to kind of, one, tap into the pure representation that is there in your social fabric, right? Like if you ask me, Sandhya, is this a focus for GCPL in Indonesia? I may say maybe not, but we may focus more on, say, cis women, PWDs, and say the Eastern Indonesian indigenous communities that are there, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So I think one, in India, maybe the narrative is a little more grounded here, because if you look at the larger social fabric, cis women form almost half of the entire population, right? And then if you look at persons with disabilities, although the census was conducted even before the RPWD Act came into being, right? Which also expanded the definition of persons with disabilities. And the RPWD Act, which is rights for persons with disabilities, actually, expanded it. But these basically are tangible measures today for us in the broader Indian ecosystem, where we've also had, say, progress legally, right? And I think that's where the Indian ecosystem is saying, okay, now there is some legal machinery at the broader, ecosystem level. So as organizations, how can we take it a couple of notches higher, better, do more intentional work? And I think that's what's created space for more awareness. So to be able to have conversations, debunk a lot of stuff. Like I know over the last month, we've spent a lot of time just in sensitization and education of our senior leaders and managers, in Gwalior, in the head office, about LGBTIQA inclusion, right? And what has the journey and trajectory been like? And the questions in those forums also indicate a certain degree of curiosity that has been there for a long time, but no space to have these conversations or these beliefs addressed. So I think that would say my perception of why today the larger focus is women, the LGBTIQA community, and persons with disabilities.
But as you're saying, but in other regions it's different. So in Nigeria, It would be local Nigerian leadership, right?
True. In South Africa, there's a lot of focus around race and ethnicity because it's just such a cultural melting pot, right?
Yeah.
There'll definitely be focus on LGBTIQA inclusion as well. But if you look at the greater Africa region, I mean, Africa really rides on the backs of their women. So our gender representation, in fact, a sizable chunk comes from what we call the Godrej Africa, US and the Middle East business.
Correct. Now, again, to both of you, I know that DI, I don't think that it starts with hiring at all, but I think it's where many people who come to the workplace for the first time actually have their first experience with DI. So, Zoya, I want you to tell us specifically about how you've used hiring to really advance queer inclusion at Godrej Properties. So, how did you take the people at GPL from literally a handful to now like 140, 200?
I think, yes, everything doesn't start with hiring, but representation is key to increasing the front on DEI, okay? And I say this with all the weight because what generally happens, I told you, right, a lot of conversations, we tend to do sensitization in the most ways that we take a deck, we do a presentation, and then we'll talk about, say, women inclusion or LGBTQ inclusion, may do some awareness on unconscious bias. But what really matters is when you bring in the people into the organization, right? That is the best form of sensitization. Otherwise, these presentations, these sessions will become a lot of gyan for the people who are not from those marginalized communities and will have nowhere to actually apply this information that they have received. And hence the representation is like the key to the whole structure on D&I. And that's why I think where we focus, like I mentioned, where we said that we had all the policies, but we didn't have the people. In the last 2 years, we went about hiring. So I think I was like the 8th person who joined GPL. And now we are about 120 in LGBTQ. We have around 80 plus in persons with disabilities. And across the spectrum in both of the two cohorts that I just mentioned, even women is sitting at around 29% representation as of financial year last year.
Which is above industry average, but far from what would be
the
ideal.
industry average for construction and real estate is 12%. It's the saddest. And it's sad that construction and real estate or reality as a sector is the second largest industry that recruits or employs people after agriculture, right?
Correct.
And then you having a 12% really makes an impact. And that's why also when we look at GPL, we say that we are not building talent for just ourselves. We are building for the industry.
Yeah.
People may join us, may leave us for some time, but we know that they will come back to us for the culture that we create, right?
Yeah.
We are focused on hiring people from these marginalized cohorts. I think a lot of hiring drives, working with consultants in the space of these marginalized cohorts, actually putting out our information that, we are an inclusive organization. These are the changes that we have made in our hiring process. Because I think before you go to hiring, you need to do 4 steps before that and 5 steps after you've hired, right?
Yeah.
So the onboarding process has its issues and you need to see how you are changing these processes for the marginalized communities, right? Like, so for example, again, I'll give you a trans related example. When we started hiring a trans person, we realized that our systems or, most of our processes are guided by the systems that we are there. We'll say that, we have a first name and a last name, and then you have to enter these things. Then we had to go back checking that how do we put the taken name if in the case where the legal name hasn't been changed for
Correct.
a transitioning person. Same thing from our persons with disability. We wanted to look at reasonable accommodation. So we looked at saying dyslexia. So I myself am a dyslexic or a person with dyslexia. And I realized that when we hire people, we do provide certain amount of aptitude tests, right, at the beginning. That is numerical reasoning or verbal reasoning. Both of them affect a person with dyslexia in the terms of dyslexia and dyscalculia. We went and we checked that what is the reasonable accommodation that needs to be provided. And now we provide extra time at the time when they're providing this aptitude test. Because dyslexia is seen so much as a point of,
Stigma.
of a stigma, that like, this person is a slow learner, it affects their thing and hence they might not be capable to even come a part of it. I think that stigma is what we're trying to affect. And I think it's we're on the right path and hopefully a lot of more dyslexic thinkers join us.
So as I was saying, Zoya is being modest. Godrej Properties is the only company in India which has actually been recognized as being dyslexic friendly. It is truly a badge of honor.
Thank you.
Amazing.
As have been so many other awards. Can you quickly take us through some of, because it's quite fascinating, right? In every cohort, your interventions are so purposeful and intentional, right? Like say the trans accommodation policy, for example, or the enhanced amount of money for hormones or for surgery, the fact that you have to just complete a 6 months probation, or, say for persons with disabilities, the fact that you have a very, very specific, not just providing software and infra, but a very, very specific learning campaign. Just take us through some of these so that the listeners can know some of the hard work that goes behind some of this work. Yeah.
Sure. So whenever we get into a cohort, we try to understand the equity gap that exists with this cohort, that they're not able to at least enter the workforce or why they are not able to excel in the workplace, right? What has happened is that the conversations that we have had with these people is where we have actually learned a lot more. The trans accommodation policy that you mentioned, it came from a learning of hiring a person who is trans, right? I would consider myself as a very privileged trans person. But then there are people from the trans community that are not so privileged as me. I'll just mention this one particular case where we hired a trans person in Pune, and through our channel partner network, they were able to identify a home. When I say channel partner, I'm meaning retail brokers. Being in real estate, we do have channel partners.
People who sell the house for you and get a commission.
Yeah, so we do have them on our connections, and we had got them a house from that. They'd even paid the token, and then they were going into their house, which they had actually got on lease on, and the housing society or the RWA, they stopped them, saying that, you can't enter this space because trans are not allowed. What happens is that person calls me up, and it's like 11 p.m. at night, and she just asks me one thing which still stays with me, and she says that, are we even really human? And that time I spoke with Megha, and I said, hiring is not, it's the easiest thing to do.
But it's the first step.
It's the first step, but how do we kind of let them survive and let them thrive at the workplace?
Yeah.
And that's when trans accommodation as a policy was also being discussed, and we came out saying that, okay, can we take the properties on our name and then sublet it,
Yeah.
It's a little more work for our admin teams to find houses. And I'm really being decent about saying that little more work.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. So the first accommodation that we managed to get in Pune after this incident, my admin team took around 17 or 18 rejections as Godrej before we got the 19th one, saying that, okay, this is a space that we've got. Now, if an organization like Godrej faces this, then an individual has almost no
We know the Kochi Metro example.
Yes,
very famously. Yeah.
Very famous, where, they were given the jobs for the metro line. The metro line runs within the city limits. Yeah. They did not get accommodation there. They had to go in the outskirts. How much will they travel?
And then most of the trans employees left.
Yeah.
Not because they didn't like the job.
They left,
but they couldn't just find a home, right? Yeah.
So this is one of these examples. Then in the space of persons with disabilities, we launched something called as Disable Me. The campaign name ideally comes from the space that, what are the spaces or what are the actions or the elements that disable somebody, and what is it that disables them? And
so THIS-ABLE-ME.
Yeah. So the logic was always to identify what can we do as an organization in our workspaces that moves away from the whole ableistic point of view and creates a space that is accessible for everybody.
Yeah.
We did a lot of sensitization in the form of a Mario-inspired video. We made 3 videos, one for speech and hearing impairment, one for visual impairment, and one for locomotor disability. In each video, the main character, inspired from Mario, was with the specific disability and how they navigated the workforce.
Yeah.
The logic was, how do we make complex conversations or complex topics such as disability accessible to the employees itself, right? Because they might not be aware. And again, we did not want to do a presentation. We didn't want to say, this is the Right to Persons with Disability Act, there are 21 types of disabilities. How do you break such complex pieces and then kind of make it accessible?
But you accompany all this with real action, right? With sites which are actually PWD friendly, where people can work with real infrastructure, with software, with everything, right?
So simultaneously, we were doing a lot of hiring with this, right? That's why I said representation along with sensitization.
Yeah.
We did hire people from locomotive disability. We hired people with speech and hearing impairment, along with that with visual impairment. We learned along with them that what can we do as reasonable accommodation. So just I'll plug in that we do have a site in Pune, which we call as the all-inclusive model site. When I say an all-inclusive model site, means we looked at representation to mirror the community that we serve. So we have 50% cis men, 40% cis women, and 10% LGBTQ and PWD at site. Plus, we have incorporated visual cues into the site's design itself, along with just, I'm not even referring to accessibility, or I'm not referring to just gender neutral washrooms or an inclusive washroom, but in the design where we have the insignia theme of everyone is welcome here, featuring, because what we realize is that we can sensitize our employees. Okay, we can make them sit through sessions, we can provide email communication, but how do we do it for a customer? So when they walk into our site, they should know that this is Godrej, this is what we stand for, and you will find people from different walks of life. And that was one thing. In that same site, we do have something, we call it a silent site, where we have hired speech and hearing impaired persons along with a sign language interpreter, so that the communication barrier is met. Plus, we are teaching ISL to the other employees who are non-SHI.
Yeah.
So that over a period of time, at least they are able to learn some basic communication without the need of an ISL interpreter. Last I'll plug in is women, where over a period of time, obviously, Godrej's group has always been looking at how do we excel in bringing women into the workforce. The recent changes that we have made in terms of small policies, So I think we worked on the whole caregiving policy where we looked at paternity, we looked at maternity, and we looked at, are these terms really needed? Can we move into a primary caregiver? Can we move into a secondary caregiver? Can we look at what is the support that a individual requires to even provide from an elder care point of view?
Yeah.
Going on to, we have launched something as the POSH SOS helpline, where we realize that some of our sites are extremely far because construction won't happen in the midst of the cities. So a number that you can call if you feel unsafe, not for the sake of redressal, but for the sake of just feeling safe at that point of time where you're feeling unsafe, right? Yeah. We did partner with another vendor where we now provide an employee assistance program for women going on to maternity leave. Yeah. So, when you're planning your child or when you're just getting into the whole space of pregnancy, then what is the support that you require? And lastly, recently we have launched CREW, as you mentioned in the starting. Yeah. So CREW stands for Collective of Real Estate Women, where we are trying to bring in all the women from real estate as an industry together onto a panel. When I say a panel, I'm meaning a space, where collectively we're looking at what needs to be done in the industry to increase representation and also increase the leadership positions of women moving into leadership positions. So that's...
So lots of exciting work. And thank you, Zoya, for sharing all of these with all of us. Sandhya, I want to ask you, tell us about some of the things that you are doing and how you're actually taking DEI at Godrej Consumer from, nice to have to imperative and imperative to the future success of this company.
If I had to just kind of broadly talk about the areas of focus, I think one has been and will always be representation, right? I think the overarching question of asking ourselves, what does equal look like? And how can we get there? By when can we get there?
Yeah.
Right. Also, what would that be in terms of different markets? Yeah. And being an FMCG organization, we have to acknowledge manufacturing as an industry has had its own set of systemic barriers. Sales, a large chunk of our workforce comes from what we call general trade sales, right? Which is really feet on street, interacting with kirana stores, with the distributors, right? And I think to be able to drive representation in these buckets, therefore, I feel requires a lot of, concrete action. I think we've all put down saying, what does our representation movement need to look like in the next 1 year? You'd see a lot of that is going to be powered by, we have an initiative called 100 Women in Sales. And this is probably one of our big goals for this year. And if I talk about sales as an example, along with that comes, say, focus on infrastructure. Now, as soon as you're thinking about women in sales, they're going to be on the field the entire day. You honestly, and I think the number of field visits that I have done and shadowed, just the ability to get access to clean washrooms, right? So one is, yes, I think we're looking at a tie-up with a Wulu, which is a toilet aggregator. And we've just launched that for our women in sales. But at the same time, that can't be the only solution, because then how are you holding your channel partners responsible for the quality of the partnership you have with them?
Yeah.
Right. And this is where a distributor checklist comes into play, saying that what are the 5 to 7 basic things that we're expecting all our distributors to have in terms of infrastructure. The other ancillary basic is safety.
Correct.
And you can do POSH. Like I said, we've been reading about legal systems since 2017. But to be able to do it in the spirit of prevention of sexual harassment, right? I think a workplace for a woman in field sales is just unending, because you can have experiences anywhere, anyhow, that can really, I think, disable your overall faith in a career, a brand, etc., right? Now we're extending this entire piece, because there was also a learning saying that given that the ecosystem is so limited, and what is framed today as your internal committee, which is, a committee set up for handling cases around sexual harassment in the workplace, is largely restricted to most of our organized, players, right? What can protect us if there is something that happens, say, at a distributor point, right? So, or at a retailer point. So I think we started this comprehensive exercise because it is required by all establishments which have at least 10 employees to
Correct.
have the internal
Yeah,
committee.
yeah.
Without the internal
Yeah.
committee, there is not even a space where you can pick it up and redress it.
Correct. Yeah.
And all of us know how much it actually takes for women to go to a police station and file a complaint.
Yeah.
So you need to really get into the depths of it. And I'd say this has been some of the work. So we've started mapping out all our retailers.
Yeah.
We've started mapping out our third-party employers to say, do you have an IC, an internal committee in place?
Yeah.
Do you conduct awareness? Because a lot of our staff in the sales also comes from third-party employers who work
Yeah.
with us. So we've started this mapping process. And I think that's largely the sales ecosystem. The manufacturing ecosystem is exciting because along with it also comes, and I just realized, for a very long time, I've always believed that DEI as a function may not really sit just only within HR, right? I feel like it's a very organizational level function
Completely.
that cuts through and permeates through, because the minute we are going into manufacturing, and if I just had to pick up, this whole piece on care and maternity leave, if I had to look at an implementation SOP, I need to go back to really understanding how shift operations are planned. And do we have some of the best practices in shift operations that may not exist in India but could exist in developed countries? And what can we borrow from there? Because you're talking about job assessments that happen in pre-maternity.
Correct.
To say, what is the load the person is handling?
Yes.
Is the person given adequate breaks? Because, manufacturing is also an industry which relies heavily on productivity, and that can immediately write off 15, 20-minute breaks,
Yeah.
right? You're also, I think, surrounded more by men. So I think adding a little more gender balance will also kind of establish some bit of empathy on these categories. But when you're talking about the implementation of a care policy, you're talking about a pre-maternity period, you're talking about a maternity period and a post-maternity period. Some of the complications that come up in implementing this in a pre-maternity period is what is the kind of job the person is doing, whether there is some form of a cover employee who's shadowing the role,
Yeah.
so that when the person is away on maternity, so there's a lot of workforce planning that really comes in. But when you are in towns that are non-cities, I also feel like the social conditioning and the social sensitization is a lot higher.
Yeah.
You need to be able to engage with families. You need to be able to, continue to be in touch with the person that they can have a career after they give birth, right?
So
and
that
after
even
they
if
are a
the
parent.
husband or in-law is not enthusing them to come back.
We had such an inspiring story from, Malanpur where, and this was not with maternity, but it was with marriage, right? Where one of our colleagues was actually getting married. And we had her partner, like when they were talking about the marriage discussions, she said that, I see myself continuing work after marriage. And the in-laws were like, what are you thinking? I mean, he already has a business. Why don't you just join his business? But the partner actually stood up for her and said that is entirely her decision. If she wants to work, right, I think it's important for her to exercise her agency around it.
Yeah.
But
so a lot of your work is on this as well. And I
So a lot of
hope people
social
listening are
conditioning.
understanding that DI work is really comprehensive, right?
it's
not
very
just making
comprehensive.
policies.
And then I think coming to the post-maternity phase, I
Yeah.
think going back to that conversation we had, in the first 6 months of returning, when you're just trying to make sense of your body clock after 6 months of, giving birth to a child, I mean, how does one expect you to be on night shift every week? 1 week every month, right? So I think a lot of the D&I work, Parmesh, that we are currently doing is really going back and saying we have these fantastic policies, right? But if I had to look at, the implementation, and is it really benefiting the person at the other end? I think that's the question that we need to ask ourselves.
Tell us about some of the exciting work in the new factory that you're co-building.
So it's also been envisaged as a lighthouse, right? And when we're saying like it's a lighthouse factory, all in terms of digitization, you're also talking about, the aesthetics, the workforce. You're going to have a very different generation of workforce that's
Yeah.
going to be
So lighthouse
at the
factory, for those
factory.
listening, means best standards, and
Yeah.
it's very hard. There's very few lighthouse factories in India.
Yeah,
It
and very
means-
good sustainability standards.
Yeah, it means
right?
meeting the best global standards. Yeah.
Around technology, sustainability, and DEI.
Infrastructure. Yeah.
DEI is, of course, a key component of it.
Yeah.
We're looking at establishing a gender balanced workforce. I think on an average, we're looking at about 400 employees between the permanent and a few contractors, as well as the apprenticeship program that there is. So we're talking about gender balance. We're talking about at least 5% individuals from PWDs and the LGBTQ community. The project is going to be commissioned in November this year. A lot of work is going on into structuring the kind of changes, right? And that's why I say DEI goes so far beyond the HR department, because a lot of my time right now has been spent with project teams, with infrastructure teams.
Building ramps with...
We're looking at accessibility designs and we're saying, is this adequate for the communities who are coming, for the volume of the communities, right?
Yeah.
Aesthetically, can there be different spaces? And I remember we proposed like an equity space, which is going to be like, a spot for all our people to just hang and chill and be themselves, right? So I think one, a lot of work around infra accessibility. Secondly, we're talking about digital accessibility. So our whole first block is access, right? Is the first part of our framework. We're also looking at access in terms of recruitment. So we've also, already started hiring. So I think we're already at gender balance with respect to all the white collar hiring that has happened. We finished most of our blue collar hiring as we speak. Next week, we are planning for our hiring drive of persons with disabilities, where we're expecting at least about 40 to 50 persons with disabilities who are going to be coming in Chennai. And then our last cohort will be the LGBTQ community that we're hiring in the month of October, right? And onboarding in December. So I think overall, access as a piece has started taking shape.
Yeah.
The second part is really integration, and we're already thinking about, what are the onboarding policies that we need? What are the ancillary legal, structure and machinery that we need? Like, for example, if you're hiring persons with disabilities, you need a licensing officer.
Correct.
So what would that mean in an ecosystem where they don't know who a licensing officer is? Who can be that licensing officer? What is their role, right? Similarly, with respect to, trans, by hiring from the LGBT community, if you do have trans people on your roles, you need to be able to have your compliance officer,
Correct.
right? So I think putting some of those legal pieces in place is also equally important. So we're also focusing on that as part of the, entire integrate pillar. And then we have support, which is really to say, how are we going to support these communities to thrive? It means tweaking some of our policies at a manufacturing level to make them more inclusive, ensuring that, if we need to have a trans accommodation closer to our factory, what does it mean to have that, right? So those are pieces that we're already trying to think of right now. The last two pillars are develop and enabling success,
Correct.
right? Develop really focuses on, and I think this is like a lot of learning that I've had earlier on in my career, where we were consulting with a client who had persons with disabilities. But when they kind of saw their career trajectory after 10 years, they were doing the same work. And all of that came from their experience on a survey where they said there is no career development progression, they're not being paid fairly, and promotions are not fair. And this cohort reported lower feedback, which was a starting point to do this investigation, where you eventually arrived at the fact that nobody was thinking about a focused career path or plan, right? So I think the fourth piece and how we want to be able to work on it too, is also to say, can we take apprentice, like as part of the National Apprenticeship Promotion Scheme, which
Correct.
most manufacturing firms hire from, can we have persons with disability? We've identified a couple of programs in mechatronics that they can also do while they're doing their apprenticeship with our organization, and see how they can also be upskilled so that, ride the entire wave of industrialization 4.0 as we may see it.
Yeah.
And then fifth one is enabling success. I think if you look at most of our CSR activation programs, if you look at community outreach programs, they're also going to be targeted towards supporting everything that we want to do, because DEI is far beyond, and so many examples that I've cited, it cannot be contained in the walls of your organization. And you can't say this is just for us. It's very comprehensive. We're hoping that this framework kind of also creates a blueprint for a lot of manufacturing organizations who could go along the way and create more inclusive ecosystems.
And this apprentice program is also what, Zoya, you've been doing in real estate as well. And I think a lot of our Godrej companies, actually not just us, a lot of the companies we speak to, when we meet them at awards and all these other things, realize that a lot of this work is actually happening across corporate India, right? Whether it's in building the infra, whether it's in creating these pipelines, because that's the only way we're going to go.
True, Parmesh. So a lot of what we managed to do in, I think, August of 2022 is when we really launched the Pride Internship program for an LGBTQ cohort.
To learn about real estate.
Yeah, because if I look at real estate, generally a hiring manager will want to have this plug and play kind of resource, right? That's the key thing for them, right? They get somebody from real estate, has been there for about 2 years and knows the game, and then they are just putting them up. So the training gets reduced. But if I am going to be hiring from, say, marginalized cohorts like LGBTQ, I'm not going to find it in real estate. Saying that 12% is the thing. So if we have to do hiring, it has to be building for the cohort, right? It cannot be that we are buying the resources available, right? Because they are not there. And hence the Pride Internship as a concept was coming. And I do see a lot of other organizations doing in the same space. Okay, they'll launch a queer internship or a Pride internship, but it gets limited to hiring interns. The aim shouldn't be to hire interns. It should be to bring in resources, make that a pipeline for your talent that you are able to convert to a full-time position. If you end it at an internship, then you're not building that learning journey for them. Neither are they actually going to get converted. And your end objective of increasing representation doesn't happen. And that's where I feel that we have, at least in the last 2 years, been able to establish a Pride internship rather than launch one.
Correct.
I think, and I will use the two words very differently because we do have some converts now, I think around 14, 15 from the internship. We do have people who have exited us at some points of time during this internship, but it has become at least a pipeline builder so that they're coming
to a career. And that's what you were also talking about, Sandhya.
Exactly.
Right?
So we're saying that the National Apprenticeship Promotion Scheme anyways exists. Instead of making it so male dominant, one, can you make that more gender balanced? Because one, you have more women coming into this stream. Because what is our biggest challenge today, permission manufacturing, is you don't find enough women in the ITI streams of what we call core fields, which is say electrical, plumbing, etc. You'll find them more in beauty, those ancillary courses, right? So can we establish a program that has a better gender balance right there? Can we establish that program with disability representation right there and support them with the necessary courses that can actually upskill them into where the economy is moving? I think this is the big investment that organizations need to make. It's also very sensible because you anyways are getting a lot of benefits from the program itself as the organization. The government incentivizes you quite a bit.
For now, I'm going to ask you one lastest question. What is the hardest challenge that you both think we have to solve hamare line mein in this field? And then our second hardest. So Sandhya, you say hardest. And Zoya, you can say what is the second hardest
That's
challenge?
difficult.
You want to go first?
Let's
No, I'm just continuing on the line of humor though. I think the hardest challenge to solve is DEI is a very lonely function. And for the DEI professionals who don't have a sense of humor or a humor group within their organization, it's going to be very hard for them to survive. So I think that's the hardest challenge that we need to solve.
I think from a work point of view, I'll say the second hardest or the hardest for me right now is the inclusion of persons with disability, right? Because the world is built in such an ableistic point of view. Even it doesn't come naturally to me at points of times, right? And I think we really need to change the way we think to include persons with disability because the world has been created in such a way that is exclusive of them. Whether it is the city infrastructure, whether it is coming to the offices, education as an access itself is such a big issue because when I say I'm an equal opportunities employer, I have to create eligibility criteria for a particular role. And then the roles itself have also been thought through by ableistic people, right? So say, for example, if I am a hiring manager, I will think that, if I can do this role, then this other person should be able to do this role because these are 4-5 tasks. They've already evaded of a majority of the persons with disability who they think will not be able to do these tasks, right? And then we really need to go back to the drawing board to say that what are the negotiables and non-negotiables of this role that a person with disability will be able to do, rethink on what that compensation for that role will then demand, and then kind of go hunting. I think a lot needs to be done on thinking that through, because otherwise it's only going to be retrofitting, which you will not be able to do, and it will not be at scale that we'll be able to hire persons with disability for sure.
Sandhya?
If I had to answer it at a philosophical level, Parmesh, for me, it would be giving up power for those who are in power, right? Which is typically your majority groups today.
Yeah.
And honestly, unless we're not creating space, I think the entire evolution of equity, equality is going to stagnate, right? So I think that's probably...
How do you incentivize those in power to share the space with others?
Exactly.
In a way that they don't feel threatened.
I think I'll just add to that, the whole concept of a workplace being a shared space needs to be understood.
Yeah.
The moment it becomes my space, which for that duration of that period is going to be your space, and hence applying that power, saying that these people are not allowed in this space, but at a period of time you will also leave this space, and there's a high probability there's attrition, there is stuff that happens, that the understanding that this is a shared space needs to come in. And I think once that comes in, then the concept of power is understood better.
True.
So helping them understand that it's win-win for them to share is actually their win.
True. I think at the second and a more logical level is talent. We've got to acknowledge that if today your competitors in the market are coming back and saying we are also experiencing very high attrition of women, you've got to know that just stealing women from one company into another is not going to solve the long-term talent crunch. So I think for organizations to fully comprehend that investment in talent means a lot, and that can be at multiple levels. It is at a primary education, secondary education level. How are you ensuring best curriculum, more women in STEM in the 11th and 12th, create more mentorship, better support. And so you really need to know where your money, whether it's part of philanthropy, whether it is part of CSR, how are these channels, driving towards a potentially brighter future?
So that you can have your pipeline.
So you can have your pipeline. And I think because this is going to be it, this War for Talent is going to continue for the next 3-4 years, unless some of us really also invest in long-term strategies, right? And I think just to converge, like the DEI space that as I see it right now is really the creator space. So it's a space where you're going to keep looking at how this function permeates across people, policies and practices, across marketing, across CSR, across products. So I think it's a fabulous space, and there's nowhere else I'd rather be right now.
But for this episode, I want to thank both of you for coming, for sharing with such honesty, vulnerability, and humor both your journeys.
Thank you for listening to India Included. If you enjoyed this episode, tell us. Please subscribe or follow and leave a rating and review on the podcast app you're listening to. To find out more about us and the work we do, visit GodrejDEILab.com. You can also find us on Instagram and LinkedIn at Godrej DEI Lab. Stay tuned for more.